And welcome back to Miniature Dragon Comic Review. As always, I'm your host for the evening, Daniel Doc Gentry, and with me is our only guru today, Alex, where Woody is traveling to Portland, Oregon today. Seattle is
He's trying
in,
to run out of the snow.
he is, and Seattle is under emergency, whatever. I'm from the Midwest, so I already shoveled my driveway. It's good. Uh, well, hi, Alex. We're going to be doing Conan, and I
Hi.
know you guys are seeing Conan 1 and 2, but we're just going to do Conan 1 tonight because we're missing Woody. But I haven't looked at this. Now, this is a new revamp of Conan, I think. It's 2019 is when it started. I gotta look all that up. So this is not the original Conan the Barbarian we're talking about, which, if I'm not mistaken, there is a comic for that, correct?
Correct. This is if I recall right, this is Marvel's newest take on it. So they got the property rights for this, and within the book, it's definitely an interesting take because I feel like they took inspirations from some of the classic stories, but just kind of gave it a new take. Because there are some aspects that you can, if you read any of the other novels or seen part of movies or cartoons or checked out some of the other various comic books that have been done with Conan, this has some of that feel,
Okay. I was
but
just
obviously
wondering
its own
because
direction.
I know Conan used to be a book. I knew it was a movie, but I was dead sure that it was a comic book as well. And an old one if I remember right. It wasn't like I don't think they did a movie and then created a comic book. I think the comic book was already in existence, right?
Yes, I believe so. When Arnold Schwarzenegger did the first set of movies, uh, what was that, 80 such, um, there was previous editions of comic books that were done. And offhand, I don't know what studio had it, but I do want to say that Marvel might have had the rights ages ago. But it's always interesting to see like these different properties go through different hands of, who picks them up. It's kind of like this franchise gets the right to basically put on this type of materials for X amount of time. A great example was Godzilla. Marvel had Godzilla for a while. Then there was Dark Horse, IDW, and various others. But uh, going back into this, um, it's definitely an interesting retelling or retake of the story. What was kind of some of your thoughts, Doc?
Well, some of my thoughts are I have Google, so I'm asking my friend Google about Conan the Barbarian. All right, so it looks like the original movie came out in 1982, so kudos on that one. Apparently, I must have missed there's a remake in 2011.
Oh, right. I yeah, I didn't see the remake myself, but
It's probably a good thing.
mm,
Um, it originated. Oh, look at this. It says it originated in pulp fiction magazines and has since been adapted to books, comics, several films, blah 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 blah. But I guess it was a short story originally. That's pretty cool.
mm. So it makes it kind of sound like Pulp Fiction in the time period and the respects of like, say, H.P. Lovecraft or some of those other uh, novelists that would have done short stories for magazines, like
Well,
weird.
so it looks like Robert E. Howard is the original creator of Conan the Barbarian, and the fantasy stories were published in Weird Tales in 1932. So this goes back. This is just the newest translation of, and I agree with you. In the first book, as I was reading this, it really did feel like the old Conan. There's nothing weird. It's not hiding anything. Yeah, but anyways, yeah, it says pulp outlets. I guess Pulp Fiction is like Weird Tale stuff like that. Not Pulp Fiction the movie, obviously. Looks like 1932 was when it started. This was pretty huge though. He submitted a short story in 1931, but didn't start writing all the stuff. It looks like I'm trying to find out when the first comic book publication of it was, but this is good. So if you guys don't understand how this works, before there was comic books, there were these pulp fiction books, and what that means is not like Pulp Fiction the movie, but the short stories would be gathered. A lot of people used to do this, and you can get this book like a Reader's Digest pretty much every month, I thought it was. And it would have like short stories, and there'd be horror stories, there'd be pulp mysteries, there'd be different kinds of stuff in there, and you can read through it. And so that's how stories got out. It was kind of like the first comic book before somebody decided to draw it. And that's where Conan the Barbarian started. So we could probably say that it started almost as a comic book without pictures, because it started off as a short story thing before comic books. So that's super interesting to me. Sorry, that was just one of those things. Because Conan the Barbarian is like, you know, you have your movie adaptations of it with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I know there's been multiple like different short story writers, not just Robert E. Howard, but other people throughout forever. You could pick up new Conan books today. It's amazing to me that something can grab on and be this thing throughout history. You're talking almost 100 years. You know, in 13 years, it's 100 years of Conan the Barbarian stories. And Marvel is jumping in on this as well, which that's the comic book we're doing today. But it is interesting to me that something that's a long-running thing, and to have some kind of restart, and it's interesting to me. So what did you think of the comic book itself, Alex?
So, on the comic book itself, I felt the first book, since we're going to just go on to the book, I thought it had that classic kind of sword and sorcery, that classic feel of how the world went with some of the other various mediums. You know, granted, when I read, like I think I've said in previous episodes, I do voices in my head because that's just the kind of nutball that I am. So having Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, go through and being the Conan really made it kind of hilarious for me as I was reading Conan's part in his voice. But to be honest, I felt like this fit really well within the lore, within the mythos, within the storytelling that has been previously done. You know, it took itself just serious enough to like take inspirations from other stories that has been done within Conan. You know, like King Conan, the various other aspects of his story. What about yourself, Doc?
Well, so I mean, for the matrix of the story, I will say it did feel like the short stories from a long time ago. I like it. Still has that witch, the one witch that's annoying. I don't know if it's the same witch. That was my thing. I didn't have enough time to research this. But it does have the annoying witch that keeps having like a little bit of a return in the story, and it feels like that's what's going to keep happening here. It has the Picts, so that's a normal thing. This is something the barbarians and the Picts would fight each other. They were the two uncivilized societies of the time, and they didn't want to be called civilized. It had the feeling of Conan the Barbarian and his tribes after he became king. Has the very inventive nature. They're what barbarians, you know, in history were, which was they wanted to live outside. They wanted to be tough. The only way to be tough was not to have the comforts of the world, but they were smart. They were intelligent. They were inventive. And they always came up with new things. Even though they didn't always enjoy them or use them themselves, they were inventors of different things. Not just what we know them today as the bashing warrior types, but you know, the first people to do cisterns and movement of water and stuff like that. And I thought the storyline on that was actually pretty cool, and I did enjoy it a lot. The art in this, Conan looks like Tarzan to me. Like every adaptation of Tarzan that's out there, he really looks like that to me.
You know, actually, that was something that was kind of on my mind, was his look, the design of how the character was portrayed had this real feel of like there was just something so different with the way that his haircut was. And I think you really nailed it on the head, because it's like, I was kind of going like, oh, okay, this is just the style of how this version of Conan is. But yeah, I can totally see the like Tarzan, and really kind of changes it of like, me, Conan.
Well, and
You
thank God he
dead.
didn't do that, because I would have lost it. But the
Oh
look
God,
of
yeah.
Tarzan, what I mean by that is like the skinny, muscular type, which would not work in a barbarian world. Um, Barbarians were more built like the strongmen of our type. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look up strongmen competition on YouTube. Watch a couple videos. Those dudes don't have a six pack. They're very buff. They've got almost no neck because the traps are so big. But those guys throw trees in competition, and I'm not even over exaggerating that. They take an entire length of a power line trunk tree and flip it over, and they do feats of strength like that. And that's what Conan was supposed to be. You know, even if he had some definition, he was this ogre big beefy guy who, when he moves, you would be really surprised at his agility, because in every Conan the Barbarian dogma that there ever has been, he's quicker than he looks. It's always something that's always brought up, and they even did it this time in the story, which is, you're faster than you look.
Right. The opening part within this book has a gladiatory scene, and it really shows, like, him just being this, like, not only powerhouse, but just a ballerina of death.
Oh yeah, and his moves in it are actually pretty cool. I don't like the skinny muscular type. Like, somewhere along the line somebody said, "Oh, that's the epitome of power." And most strongman types, like I can't remember the guy. I think he's Thor, but it's not Thor. Who's the guy who plays the Mountain in Game of Thrones?
Oh, unfortunately, I don't recall the guy's
All
name
right.
either, but I get what you mean by that type of build.
Yeah, so
Where,
he's not like,
I mean,
he's
he is
not
a
like,
brick.
yeah, he doesn't have like fat, but I guarantee you he doesn't have a six pack, because that's a solid piece of massive muscle there that's not defined, because he didn't like train himself and like just get the abs. Like, he built the strength of the core muscle, which usually looks like this padding in the front. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. Real strength is what it comes down to, instead of perceived strength. And I thought it was an interesting take on the artist part. There's nothing in this art-wise that jumps out at me. I do like the transition when the witch transitions from the young lady to the witch. I thought that was a very interesting take on how they did that. But the art is, and I've said it a million times before, go with what works, and you can't fail. If you try to do something that's too crazy out there, that's when people lose interest. I'd like to go forward and read more of the story before I make a decision on this, but it just looks like a rehash of the same old stories. I didn't feel anything new. It didn't flash new to me.
And I have to say, it's like, I got to read number 2, and I felt like this is kind of like the problem of some movies, where for a new generation, you got to tell them how Bruce Wayne, lost his family, and this is how he becomes the Bat. But at the same time, there is that level within movies where you can do something like Spider-Man Homecoming, where you don't have to show Ben dying. You don't have to show great responsibility, blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. You can just go in and say, like, this is what's established. We go forward. Where this kind of feels like they use some of the tropes from some of the novels and some of the other properties. A great introduction if you're giving a new generation to see what Conan's like. But at the same time, if you are somebody that knows about the lore and such, this is almost like going back into Spider-Man or even Batman, a rehashing of the character's origin of like you see the crime alley, you see these type of things of whatever the character doing to become what he is.
The kids are new.
Yeah, I thought that was a neat.
And I thought that yeah, and again, I wish the story writer was here because up until the kids, it just felt like the same old Conan to me. And then they added the kids, and like I like the persona of Conan in most stories because he's big, bad, tough. He'll kill everybody that's out there. Did I lose you, Alex?
Oh no. My end on Facebook, it's been
okay.
Yeah,
but anyways, it was this cool story that goes through, and like I was like, oh, it's the same old Conan, but it's a comic book. This isn't a graphic novel, so this is actually the first and second books. And as I'm reading them, I'm like, oh, this feels like the same old Conan. And then the kids entered, and I remember that one of the things about Conan was big bad. He'll fight and kill anybody, but he had a soft spot for kids. You didn't see that in a lot of stuff. I think it wasn't really written into a ton of stuff, but he really did. And they did that here. They gave it a little bit of life to that. The third Matrix that we always use, and I'll just skim right over it because they didn't do anything crazy, is the oh my gosh. Lettering. Thank you. They did the witch cast a spell at one point. I found was super interesting with the lettering. But outside of that, the lettering was just the same old that it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. It worked. It wasn't pop out at the screen. Except for, like I said, when the witch casted a spell, there was the way they did it was interesting. But it wasn't, again, in your face. It wasn't Rat Queens, which is just they changed the font. And it's actually a word in there. It's something you guys might enjoy, Rat Queens. I mean, overall, what'd you think about this thing as a book as a whole?
So, I felt like it's a great introduction to, like, if you didn't know anything about Conan, it's not a bad story. It gives a base taste of, like, what the character is. And I would say, like, if you are looking to game master a role-playing game tabletop, this would be a nice thing to take like some inspirations, like if you were doing a solo campaign with like a friend, or if you do have a group, taking this comic book could give you some great inspirations. But as like a general comic book, it was not bad story. I just didn't feel like it gave anything, for me at least, because like I said, I've read some of the novels, I've read some of the previous comic books, and seen the movies with, the Governator, and I felt like it wasn't giving me anything really new.
I really have to agree with you on that, and I think that was the point I was going to make too as an overall thing. I enjoyed this comic. It really was an interesting comic. It was a lot of fun, and plus it's fun to see Tarzan as Conan, but what it was is like a reintroduction. So if you've never like read the old comic, if the only thing you know about Conan the Barbarian is the movie, this is actually a really good time to jump into this comic book that's moving. If you're an old fan, it's probably a really good time too. I don't know. I know there's only 2 books out that I know of. I've read 1.5 of them. I didn't make it all the way through the second one. And it felt like the old Conan, but it could just be the start, because in the old Conan, where you are in the first book, is actually the middle of the story. It's not that. So it does feel like that hurry up and tell you this origin thing so we can get to where we're going. But it's really cool. And I also like the fact that, spoiler alert, they stitched the witch back together. They don't just, she doesn't like find a way to heal herself. There's really like bad stitches in her neck and stuff, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, character design, and also the thinking about like the rules of how this world works really does feel like that classic inspiration of what sword and sorcery is all about. Sword and sorcery, which is a type of genre, has rules of how magic works and how the world is kind of this brutal thing of like the very much of the Conan or
Warhammer does it in their books. Stormbreaker is another one.
Stormbreaker, things of that nature, where it's like, um, you know, there's combat, high fantasy, where there's wizard kings, and you know, damsels in distress, things that were very much an inspiration, one more inspiration, I should say, to like Dungeons and Dragons and things of that nature.
So the cool thing about Conan the Barbarian, you brought it up. We might as well, because we talked about it before. As a DM, one of the things I love to do is if I'm starting a brand new campaign, is to get my players one at a time and role play up to the point where I'm going to start them, so that we all have a good basis of where they were. But I like to role play it out. Like, who were your parents? Were they together? What happened? What tragedy? And I like it because the players allow me to be part of their story design. Because now I'm just doing what I normally do as a DM, which is I tell the story from the narrative perspective, but they still get to control their character through this process of creating this backstory for their character. Conan the Barbarian, and I've thought about this before, is kind of the same way. Because Conan ends up being a party-based system as Conan travels in the old stories. I don't know what they're doing here, but I'm just saying in the old stories. Where there was the ranger lady with the beast. There was the dude who knew magic, but he also knew how to use a sword, which was interesting. It's called Magi, if anybody wants to look it up. But there was this party that travels with Conan and goes places to places. And then Conan goes back to his tribe, and then when Conan needs his buddies again, he gets the party together and they go out. And Alex hit it on the head. Like, if this is something you want to do, you don't want the same old barbarian, you know, where you have to make your intelligence under 10 and, you know, you just got to be blah, 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 you know, the stereotype. Because Conan, if you read these, you read the old stories, actually, and I saw it a little bit in this, he's intelligent, he's smart, he knows, he can look at somebody and tell you who they are. He knew he was fighting the Picts. He knew that what the snakes were called. He knew it was unusual for the snakes to fight the way that they did. There was a lot of stuff there that you could see that if you were playing your stereotypical barbarian, you would have been like, oh, don't understand, just smash animal. You know, where Conan had that. And you could create a really interesting party design by doing something like this. Conan the Barbarian, or a type, like if you want to do this, talk to your DM 100% if you're going to do that. And the old books are great. This has started off wonderfully, and I'm not trying to knock it. It did start off really beautifully, and I like the additive of the kids, but it really felt like the same old story. But it also it felt sped up too, which is a good thing. Because it feels like they're just trying to get through this part of the story a little bit to get to where they want to go with this, which I'm interested to see. I really am. And even when I got through part of the second book, I felt the same way. So I'm going to tell you right now, this is a good book. It's been a fun start. It'd probably be a good place if you want to start a comic book that is going to be simple. One of the cool things about Conan the Barbarian and Sword and Sorcery in and of itself is a very simple understanding. When Alex was talking about the rules, usually the writers of Swords and Sorcery usually have a lot of sword and a little bit of magic, because there's a lot of specific rules for their magic. And so you don't see a lot of it, but it makes it even more interesting. And if they do it the same way with this, you are in for a great ride. It is beautifully written. And again, it's not one of those things that you have to really you have to pay attention to little details in the background, because that's the kind of book they are. But you don't have to pay attention to like, oh, well, that guy's obviously a ranger and that guy's obviously a rogue and blah, blah, blah. Listen, either they beat things with swords, or they beat with things with swords and cause magic, or they just do magic. And those are the only three options in these stories normally, which makes it really, I think, a lot more fun and easier to follow along. I'm not going to give it anything out of 5 because I don't know where it's going. I just want to be honest. The first book and part of the second book, it's a really good setup. I love it, and I hope they do something with it. I don't want to tell you guys this is going to be awesome, pick it up, and it just ends up being a rewrite of the original Conan story, though. Final thoughts, Alex?
I would definitely say it's like, check it out for yourself. As my personal opinion goes, you know, I agree with a lot of the aspects you were saying, Doc, of it's got a good start. I mean, obviously, I think this is something that if you're getting introduced to Conan, this is probably something that you're going to enjoy. Or if you're somebody that does like fantasy. Once again, it just felt too much of like seeing stuff from previous times of seeing other things from the series, from other storytellers that have done aspects of not only Conan, but sword and sorcery, or even other kind of Dungeons and Dragons-esque kind of fantasy worlds. That's the only reason why I just don't feel so heavily, excited about this in comparison to, say, like Rat Queens or Saga or some of those other books that we have talked about as that kind of mixture between, like, yes, this was very inspired by role-playing or fantasy or, these other kind of nerdy things, but a bad book. But my recommendation is definitely check it out for yourself and hit us up with your thoughts.
So we don't know what we're doing next week yet because Woody's not here. We probably will wait until either he's safely there or if he gets trapped in the storm and we find out about it, we'll probably start calling him on the phone because that's how Alex and I are. We just feel like he needs to be on his toes a little bit. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, go ahead and pick this up. I mean, even if you find it, just to read it really quick, it's a regular comic book, so it probably won't cost you much money at all. It's not a graphic novel yet. There isn't enough stories, but I'm really interested. I think it feels like a setup to a new story, so I'm super happy about that. As always, we've been telling you guys next month. Wait.
Yes. March.
Yeah, that's what I was doing.
Oh, shoot.
February, March. Yeah. Next month.
Yes.
We will be at Emerald City Comic Con booth 1812.
That is correct.
We'll all be there at some point, including Claire. We've been waiting for Claire to come back, but Claire's had to take a break from the show to do things to make it to Emerald City. So we're hoping this is going to be a good payoff for everybody. But yeah, we'll all be there. You can come say hi with us. You can give us recommendations of comics that you want us to do. And I always encourage, if you think that you've got a decent comic book and you never heard it rated before by people that will be honest with your work, bring it by. Give us a copy. We'll go through it and definitely review it. That's what this is about. Everybody knows about what Captain America is. We want to find those things that nobody knows about or learn something with you guys. It is what it is. It's really bad snowing, though, so before the power goes out, we'll go ahead and make this go away. As always, Alex, do you have anything else?
Nope. Just definitely want to say thank you for watching, and see you at Emerald.
Read more comics, keep it nerdy, and live your dreams.
Bye.
Bye.